Hello and welcome to the final screencast for Chapter 25. We have talked a lot about the different areas of the world that had decolonized and the changes that occurred after World War II. Islamism took place in Southwest Asia, or what we know as the Middle East. As you may recall, much of the Middle East were either British or French protectorates after World War I. There was a lot of Western influence in that part of the world, and the Muslims that were there were increasingly regarding America and her allies in negative terms. In other words, they felt that the West was too materialistic, didn't really respect the values of Islam or of the Arab culture. So some Muslims, not all, but some moved toward a more radical or conservative approach to the region. They declared jihad or holy war, which, as we talked about before, can be considered a war of the heart and of the mind, or it can actually be a physical war. The CIA actually supported Iranian Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. He had close ties with Americans, and the more conservative Iranian Revolution led by Ayatollah Khomeini did overthrow the Shah. After the Iranian Revolution, one of the things that I know, and having been a child and lived through this, I know that Iran was no longer going to be a place that the West was going to be able to visit freely. And while some people can still visit Iran, it is not really a popular place to go, even though it has some of the world's most antique artifacts. They're just amazing cultural heritage in Iran, which was Persia. After the revolution, the Iranians held 55 U.S. diplomats hostage for 444 days. There were, I believe, 6 who escaped. President Carter sent in a mission to try to free the American hostages. This was considered one of the failures of the Carter presidency. In fact, Carter is often looked down upon as not being a very effective president, but an amazingly wonderful human being post-presidency. This was really discouraging for the Americans. We really wanted to have our diplomats released, and a lot of all of the U.S. facilities were shut down in Iran, and any economic adventure that had come from the U.S. or from one of the other Western countries were shut down as well. And so this led to a new era of very cold relations between Iran and the West. Now, the Iran-Iraq War occurred from 1980 to 1988, and I think this map is illustrated, kind of shows where the battlegrounds were and who gained ground. But it was really sort of like a stalemate, something like World War I was. So Saddam Hussein led Iraq during this time, and he used both oil and U.S. support, primarily in intelligence gathering and in CIA training, to build a huge military machine that would attack Iran. They invade Iran in 1980, and they used chemical weapons on the Kurds. The Kurds are an ethnic minority. They have wanted to have their own state. They have not been allowed to have their own state. And it is estimated that about 12,000 Kurds died in the 1980s from chemical weapons attacks. Massive destruction on both sides of the border ends in a stalemate, and Iraq and Iran are basically where they were before. Hussein will once again try to attack and expand his influence into Kuwait. Kuwait, as you may notice, is down here. It is a sovereign country. The U.S. sends troops up through the Persian Gulf, and very, very quickly the Gulf War was ended. I actually remember the day that the Gulf War was declared. I was going out for dinner at a restaurant in Golden Valley, and the news among everyone was, oh my gosh, the U.S. is going to war. It seemed like a really terrible, terrible thing because, having been involved in Vietnam for so many years, to think of going to war again was really, really awful. But it ended very quickly. The U.S.-led coalition drives Saddam Hussein out of Iraq. In 2006, they drive him out of Kuwait, first of all, and then they go in to Iraq after the 2001 terror attacks looking for Osama bin Laden. They do end up capturing Saddam Hussein, and he is executed. So these are the timeline of events in the Arab world. You can look them up. You don't need to remember them, but they are kind of interesting to sort of have an idea of what dates are important during this time. I'm going to quickly end with looking at Latin America, in Mexico and in Guatemala and Nicaragua. In Mexico, they're not, we're not going on a full-out war with Mexico, but they're trying to stave off that neo-colonialism or the economic colonialism that Mexico has been invaded by from the U.S. So if you look at the border of Mexico and the U.S. down in Texas, just across the border, there are several garment factories. Now, the U.S. companies that run these garment factories can pay the workers there a fraction of what they would pay them if they were in Texas. And so that's the kind of neocolonialism we're fighting is, should Mexico be able to have the same standards as the U.S.? Cartagena was a leader from 1934 to 1940. He did succeed at land redistribution to the peasants per the 1917 Constitution. He was able to nationalize the oil industry. This was a bit of a standoff with FDR because the U.S. had a lot of oil investments in Mexico. And the Mexican miracle is just this intense period of economic growth from the 1940s to the 1960s. Mexico does have a legacy of authoritarian rule. You might remember some of the rulers, Porfirio Diaz and others who were authoritarian, although I believe that they're moving towards a more democratic state. And parts of Mexico are doing well. Parts of Mexico are overrun by gang violence and drug cartels. In Latin America and Argentina in particular, we have nationalist military leaders dominating politics. Juan Perón, and Eva Perón were very popular with the lower and working classes, especially Eva Perón. She went out into the communities. She worked with orphans. She worked at orphanages. She volunteered in hospitals. She was also very beautiful and very glamorous. When she died of ovarian cancer at a young age in the 1930s, the people of Argentina really, really mourned her death. But then, after Juan Perón, a succession of military dictators implemented death squads, and many people just merely disappeared from 1976 to 1983. Just a side note, after having talked about the Holocaust, Adolf Eichmann, who was the architect of the Holocaust at the Wannsee Conference, was actually captured by Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, in 1961 in Argentina. And then finally, Guatemala and Nicaragua. This neo-colonialism is still something that they are fighting, still fighting Cold War politics. So in Guatemala, we have a democratically elected President Guzman. He seized land from the United Fruit Company. This is an American fruit company. The CIA overthrew the government in Guatemala, and then a civil war occurred until the 1990s. And Guatemala is still an area that has great unrest. My niece, who is an immigration attorney in Miami, has many clients that come from Guatemala, as well as Nicaragua. In Nicaragua, still fighting Cold War politics. President Somoza was a confirmed anti-communist. He is supported by the U.S., but then he is overthrown by the Sandinista Front, and this starts war, the U.S. counter-war in Nicaragua. Again, policy of containment. We don't want communism to spread. This ends in 1989. coincidentally, the USSR officially ends in 1989 as well. So that's all I'm really going to cover about Latin America. You certainly, can research that more if you want to. So some basic revolutionary ideologies that into the 20th century are still agitation for women's liberation around the world. We've made great progress in many areas, but parts of the world still women are very, very much treated inferior to men. A search for economic equality with countries around the world. There's something called the dependence theory, where industrialized nations dominate the global economy and profit at the expense of the less developed. We see this with some of our multinational corporations, which absolutely dominate global economies. And to think of one in our own city here, Cargill Corporation, they employ many people in the chocolate industry in West Africa, and many of these people are actually children. And so in recent years, Cargill has made it a part of their mission, due to public support really for this, to try to bring education and bring healthcare and bring better working conditions to the people that provide Cargill with so much profit. So that's the end of chapter 25. Good luck. Thanks for hanging in there. Bye.